I haven't talked about this on the channel yet, but for the past two and a half months now, I've been on a book buying ban. But for some reason, during this time, I've acquired more books than I ever have. A large part of those books have been coming from the library. In February, I finally buckled down and signed up for a Libby account, and I'm kind of kicking myself in the pants because it was so easy, and I don't know why I thought it would be super complicated and hard to get a Libby account, which is all to say that even though I am technically on a book buying ban, I ended up reading more books in February than I did in January. So I'm excited to talk about all of those books, but I also recently got something in the mail, which I already know what this is, but you guys don't. And yeah, we can open it together on camera. I've never done an unboxing on the channel, so okay, so I got Seasons of Albion, the hardcover edition, and what's so special about this book is that I have a blurb on the back. This is my very first blurb on a book. Oh no, either I got oil on it or it came oily. I don't know, but that's fine. This book is so beautiful. Thank you so much to Chris and Ilan for sending me this. It's so beautiful, oh my god. Yeah, if you don't know, Seasons of Albion was my favorite self-pub fantasy of 2020. I talk about it in my best books of 2020 video, and yeah, it's just this beautiful dark fairy tale about these four people that don't necessarily interconnect physically, but spiritually their stories are just woven together in such a beautiful way. And yeah, this book is wonderful. I highly recommend you go check it out. And thank you to Chris for sending me this beautiful book. Oh, and this cover is gorgeous. Like, it's beautiful. Oh, thank you so much. And I can't believe my very first book blurb. I cannot say thank you enough times to Chris and Ilan for sending me this. Do yourself a favor and go check this out. Alright, so conveniently the first two books I read in the month were DEADHOUSE GATES and A Wizard of Earthsea. Both of those reviews are spoiler free, so I will link those in the description if you want to hear my thoughts on those books. But yeah, DEADHOUSE GATES, book 2 of the Malazan Book of the Fallen, and I'm just having a great time with the series. I'm already a quarter of the way through of Memories of Ice, book 3. So yeah, A Wizard of Earthsea was such a beautiful book. I genuinely felt so transported when I was reading it. Those two were great ways to start off my month of reading. And then after that, I read the first novella in the Murderbot series called All Systems Red. I liked it. I really liked it. I think that Murderbot as a main character is super compelling. It's literally a robot. It's not human, but despite that, it has so much emotion, and it's also incredibly funny. I was kind of worried going into it, like, you know, even the title Murderbot, I was worried that it would be too cutesy and that it wouldn't go to places that I wanted it to go. And just from this first novella, I can say that it does indeed go to those places, while also balancing those darker aspects with some more comedic elements. It's not like Terry Pratchett comedy where every other sentence you're kind of smiling to yourself, if not laughing out loud. It's not at that level. It's a very unique, kind of sarcastic, dry sense of humor that a lot of people will enjoy. Another aspect that I liked about All Systems Red was that it is a science fiction novel, but unlike a lot of other science fiction books, the science isn't the point. And I feel like this with a lot of like newer sci-fi releases where it's really obvious that the author has done all this scientific research and they want to include that in their books, but sometimes it feels like it can sort of take away the shine from the real things that actually matter, which is, you know, the plot and the characters. I felt this way with To Sleep in a Sea of Stars by Christopher Paolini, where I felt like the stuff that he was alluding to and the concepts that he was talking about were more interesting than the plot or the characters themselves. And that's not the case here, which I really appreciated. The central conflict of the plot is actually a human conflict. And even though the backdrop is very scientific, they're on this planet to do research, you know, that's not the point. One thing about the series that I will say is, I don't know, concerning, just something to think about is that they are indeed novellas, and despite that, for some reason they're like really expensive on Kindle. For example, Artificial Conditions, which is the second book, is $10.99 on Kindle. My point is that they're novellas, so they're super short, and honestly, if I didn't have the library, I wouldn't have been able to read these books because they are so expensive. Because just as a consumer, I only have a limited amount of money that I can spend on books each month. So if the choice is between an $11 novella that I can probably read in a day versus a full-size novel that I can probably get at least 2 weeks of enjoyment out of, you know, I'm gonna pick the book every time. So I don't know why the novellas are priced so high, and I think that it's the same thing with the Wayward Children series, where they are novellas and they're really short, but for some reason they're really expensive. So I don't know. All of that aside, if you are looking for a short little adventure novel, you can't really go wrong with All Systems Red. The next book I read this month was The Sound of Stars by Alechia Dow. This was a YA sci-fi novel about this girl called Ellie who lives in the near distant New York, where Earth has been taken over by aliens and humans are being subjugated. And basically these aliens have come here to take over Earth and make it into a vacation spot. There were aspects of this book that I felt were a little too on the nose for, you know, what we've been going through with the pandemic. Like just the way that Ellie would think of the world as a before and after was oddly relatable, as, you know, we've all been through this pandemic this past year. There's definitely a very clear delineation of this is now and this is what life was like before. And one of the themes of this book that Alechia Dow deals with is that, yeah, sure, stuff is really bad now, but like, was the world really that good back then? And, you know, I've been asking myself that question. And, you know, while I've been stuck at home this past year, that's something that I've been thinking about is like, yeah, this all sucks, but like, the world wasn't perfect before the pandemic, you know, like there were still things that were wrong with the earth. And I think that a lot of sci-fi novels, like especially dystopian novels, can tend to romanticize like the earth that was before. And so it was interesting to see a different perspective in that regard. I will say that the main central romance between the main character and, you know, she kind of falls in love with this alien guy who's super hot. That wasn't my favorite part of the book, but also keep in mind these characters are 17 and I'm 22, and I fully think that if I was a teenager I would have loved their romance and I would have been totally into it. That's just something that I've, you know, come to terms with, is that as I grow older, I'm not always going to enjoy the YA romances that I used to love as a teenager. That's just part of growing up. One thing I did really like about this particular romance, however, was Dow really approaches consent in a very refreshing and I think really important way, especially for a YA novel where I know that, you know, young people are going to be reading this, and I think that it's good for young people to have examples of what consent looks like, and that, you know, consent doesn't have to be unromantic. Also, a huge shout out to Ash from Pages in the Stars. She's the one who recommended this book, and yeah, she talked about this book and I was immediately sold. They had it on Hoopla, so I ended up listening to the audiobook. So thank you to Ash for the recommendation. The fifth book I read in February was A Memory Called Empire by Arkady Martine. This was my Discord read-along book, and I had such a great time reading it with everyone in my Discord. It's basically about an ambassador who has to fill in for the previous ambassador who was ostensibly murdered. The circumstances in which he died are so sketchy, and so the main character of the book is the replacement for this ambassador, and basically the book follows her as she tries to figure out what happened to him and tries to navigate the crazy politics of this huge empire called Teixkalan. I've said before on this channel that I am someone who loves politics in books. That's like my favorite part of any book, is the political subplots and the ways in which characters manipulate one another and get manipulated. That is just my favorite stuff in books. And this book is all that. There is very little to no action in this book. So if you're someone who likes action, this is probably not the book for you. But if you're like me and you live and breathe backstabbing, scheming, plotting, connivery, this is the book for you. There's also some really interesting world building going on here. You know, I mentioned earlier on in the video that sometimes it's really obvious that the author has done a lot of research and they just kind of want to show off their world. It's obvious here that the author has done a lot of research, but it doesn't come off in a way where, you know, the author is just showing off. I will say that some of the political conflict did feel a little arbitrary, and that some of the setup for later books was a little clunky, and you could kind of tell that the author was kind of inelegantly trying to set up the rest of the series. But yeah, A Desolation Called Peace just came out, so I'm thinking I might break my book buying ban and get it. I put it on hold at the library, but I'm like 22 weeks out until I get it, so I might just end up being a little too impatient to wait that long and just buy it myself. If I can say anything about A Memory Called Empire, it's that it's a very unique book. I don't think I've ever read anything quite like it, which is always very exciting as a reader. All right, and the final book that I read was Kindred by Octavia E. Butler. This book was just so difficult to read. It's about a Black woman in the 1970s who, for some inexplicable reasons, starts time traveling back to the 1800s where antebellum slavery was alive and well. And this book has so many different themes and things that it tackles. The scope of this book is just massive. Butler is primarily a science fiction writer, but honestly, I think that Kindred is much more historical fiction than it is science fiction. I was reading a bunch of Goodreads reviews for it, and someone had rated this book low because they were mad that the book doesn't deal with the time travel aspect and the mechanism by which the main character Dana was time traveling. And to me, that is a very misguided question to have about this book, because it's not how is she traveling back in time, it's why is she traveling back in time? And I think that the most apparent answer is that this time traveling and she meets with her ancestor, that to me is such a direct metaphor for generational trauma. You know, in America, we often treat slavery as this very discrete thing that happened in history and then it ended and now everything is fine, everything is perfect. And, you know, there's no institutional leftovers and that there's no consequences because of slavery. I think that this book is a direct negation and a direct rebuttal to that sentiment. And I just think that even though this book is set in the 1970s, it's still so relevant, because people today, you have people even today saying stuff like, oh, forget about slavery, like why are we still talking about it? This is the kind of book that I wish those people would read. It really brings home how insidious it was as an institution. So yeah, that was all the books I read in March. February. That was all the books I read in February. Thank you so much for watching and supporting my channel. I hope you have a wonderful day and take care. I will see you in the next video. Bye.